Here is a quick overview of what we will cover. We will cover Ricardo and the Corn Laws, the Heckscher-Ohlin model of trade, trade to whose advantage, MMT on money versus MMT on trade, the ergodic fallacy, application, a lending boom and slowdown, summary, how the lecture fits together. We will start with the foundations, build step by step, and end by tying the ideas together. The Corn Laws were laws in Britain that kept grain prices high to protect landlords. Put more directly, the Corn Laws were enacted in 1815 to maintain the income of landlords by restricting grain imports. For instance, when the Corn Laws were in effect, grain prices remained high, benefiting landlords but hurting consumers. What this example shows is that the laws favored the wealthy landlords at the expense of the general population. Understanding the Corn Laws helps illustrate the conflict between different economic classes and the impact of policy on economic growth. Once that is clear, the next step is the Heckscher-Ohlin model of trade, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. The Heckscher-Ohlin model explains how countries trade based on their resources. Put more directly, the Heckscher-Ohlin model suggests that countries will export goods that use their abundant factors of production and import goods that use scarce factors. For example, a country rich in labor will export labor-intensive goods like textiles and import capital-intensive goods like machinery. What this example shows is that trade patterns are influenced by the relative abundance of resources in each country. Understanding this model helps explain why countries engage in trade and how they benefit from it based on their resource endowments. Once that is clear, the next step is trade to whose advantage, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. Before my academic career, I was an education officer for a third world charity, Freedom from Hunger. Many people in these charities accepted comparative advantage. I knew it was bollocks, so I persuaded them to let me run a conference on the topic, which I christened Trade to Whose Advantage. For example, Australian and Asia into the 80s, February 1980, embedded one paper presenting a neoclassical analysis of the effect of a 25% cut in tariffs. Gough Whitlam's previous Labour government had cut all tariffs by 25% overnight as an anti-inflationary measure in 1973. What this example shows is how trade to whose advantage changes the behavior of the whole system once real feedback and interaction are present. This matters because economics often assumes stable equilibrium when real systems can be unstable, path-dependent, and sensitive to shocks. Once that is clear, the next step is MMT on money versus MMT on trade, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. Foundation of the MMT argument on government deficits. From Mosler. Deadly innocent fraud number 1. The federal government must raise funds through taxation or borrowing in order to spend. For example, in other words, government spending is limited by its ability to tax or borrow. What this example shows is how MMT on money versus MMT on trade changes the behavior of the whole system once real feedback and interaction are present. This matters because the lecture is building a model of the economy that behaves like the real world rather than a simplified textbook world. Once that is clear, the next step is the ergodic fallacy, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. Is a concept in mathematics and statistics that describes a system where the long-term average behavior of a single moving system is the same as the average behavior of many identical systems taken at a single point in time. Put more directly, this means that the average outcome of a single system evolving over time will be representative of the average outcome of an ensemble of systems all at the same state. For example, that's why a model can look calm near equilibrium and still become unstable once it is pushed far enough away. What this example shows is that the same system can respond very differently depending on its starting position and the feedback forces acting on it. This matters because economics often assumes stable equilibrium when real systems can be unstable, path-dependent, and sensitive to shocks. Once that's clear, we can pull the whole lecture together and see the full logic in one connected chain. Consider a hypothetical economy where banks begin lending aggressively into housing and business investment. At first, spending rises, and the system looks healthy. But the key lesson is that money, debt, asset prices, and income are moving together, not separately. That means the boom cannot be understood with a one-variable or static equilibrium model. Once lending slows, the same feedback loops run in reverse. Spending weakens, asset prices soften, and repayment pressure rises. The application shows why credit systems have to be taught as dynamic processes rather than as neutral background machinery. Return to the lending boom example. Ricardo and the Corn Laws explains why the economy cannot be understood by tracking one variable in isolation. The Heckscher-Ohlin model of trade and trade to whose advantage show why the standard model misses how credit, spending, and income interact through time. MMT on money versus MMT on trade identifies the mechanism that keeps the boom going while balance sheets expand. The ergodic fallacy then explains why the same process can reverse once lending slows and repayment pressure takes over. The synthesis is that money and credit are not background details. They are part of a dynamic system whose feedback loops shape both the expansion and the downturn.